Ukraine is NATO because we spill blood for it. Good afternoon, this is Henry Keane on UATV channel, giving the hard truths in easy terms for the whole free world directly from Ukraine. At the NATO summit in Vilnius, we need not only those open doors, but also an understanding of when and how Ukraine will walk in through them.
The NATO summit in Vilnius is an opportunity to correct the mistakes of the past and take decisive steps towards Ukraine's membership in the alliance. It is necessary to show that the door is not only open, but there is also a clear understanding of when and how Ukraine will enter it. Dmytro Kuleba, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine.
The Ukrainian minister called for development of a common security system for all countries of the Black Sea region, which are threatened by Russia, and all of them actually are. He emphasized that the Black Sea should become what Baltic has become, a NATO sea. However, even before Ukraine becomes a NATO member, our country needs effective security guarantees. During the Great War in Europe, relations between Ukraine and NATO entered a new era. Our entry into the alliance has become more real and more a necessity for both sides than ever.
Наша спільна позиція на саміті у Литві.
Our joint position at the summit in Lithuania of all participating states can be just as ambitious as European security needs. I am sure of that. Effective security guarantees for Ukraine and, in fact, for the rules-based international order are needed even before we join the alliance.
In fact, the war opened a historic window of possibility for the rapid accession of Ukraine to NATO, as Ukrainian officials, our friends in the alliance and experts openly say. Well, we are fighting and dying for the values that alliance defends. Ain't that a blood-spilled entry flyer already? And also there are several more reasons for such optimistic expectations. First, the image of Ukraine in the West, without reverence or false modesty, is very favorable. Now, due to the heroic struggle of the Ukrainian armed forces, as well as due to the generally good attitude towards Ukrainian refugees in Europe, Ukraine looks unprecedentedly good for the whole world. This, in particular, helps us move towards joining the EU, convinces the European to create an exclusive way through the procedures of the sake of Ukraine, etc., etc. Moreover, our image is so good that it sometimes even forces the West to turn a blind eye to some of our domestic problems, which would otherwise be the focus of attention. The European Union has already made a number of breakthrough decisions regarding our future accession to the EU. The chances of a political breakthrough on our way to NATO are now also at an all-time high, and the main thing is not these talks about the MAP, Membership Action Plan, because the principle was invented once formally for better preparation, but also to inhibit the entry of new members into NATO, and now geopolitical reality requires speeding up this process. In the question of Sweden and Finland in the alliance, there was an understanding about it. Now it should be found with regard to Ukraine.
The map is a step towards membership in NATO, which many countries used and which we also demanded and asked to be given to us for a very long time. For today, we ask to pass this stage because we believe that we have passed the map and Ukraine deserves to receive an absolutely different status, and therefore the understanding that we are at a different level of proximity to joining the alliance. In addition, we have annual programs that we use. We got the extended partnership program right before the full-scale war. Accordingly, we insist that the map is the stage that Ukraine deserves to pass and come much closer to.
Specialists in security issues are playing on our side. NATO is primarily a security alliance. After the attack of the Russian Federation, the understanding of this in the West increased multifold, and allies must be convinced that enlargement of the alliance will increase security in the region and strengthen NATO, not otherwise. And Ukraine, right now, for the first time in history, is able to prove that it can fulfill this requirement. Moreover, both public opinion polls and the actions and statements of Western politicians prove unprecedented confidence in the strength and fighting capacity of the Ukrainian army. Our entry into NATO, in the short term immediately after victory or even before it, in the case of a firm stabilization of the front, would mean that this would take place at a time when Russia is extremely weakened diplomatically, economically and militarily, and its reaction will be limited. Suffice it to mention that after Finland joined NATO, which became a real geopolitical catastrophe for the Kremlin, there was no response from the Russian Federation at all, except for a few unconvincing statements by Russian politicians and so-called diplomats. But what can I say? The silence speaks loud. Western sanctions and allied export regulations on Russia's defense sector, do they work? Does the Kremlin have the ability to overcome them? Let us try to analyze today, as of today's Russia's supply and production of the core weapons and systems that make up its war machine: tanks, missiles, uncrewed aerial vehicles, aircraft and electronic warfare systems. As CSIS, Center for Strategic and International Studies, sees it, undoubtedly, since it cannot produce it itself, Russia needs the key foreign components, now restricted by the Allied export control measures. Without these components, Russia cannot produce high-end defense technologies such as optical systems, bearing, machine tools, engines and microchips. Of course, the Kremlin makes efforts to mitigate the ramifications of the international sanctions regime through methods such as import substitution and sanctions evasion techniques. But does it help? Well, suit yourself. Sanctions create shortages, or better said, breach large holes in Russian economy that now is trying to drive the war rail tracks. The West that succeeded in forcing Moscow to substitute the high-tech shortages with lower quality alternatives. For now, Moscow's efforts at states-backed import substitution remain largely unsuccessful.
In the history of the world, there are no such a number of sanctions being applied so quickly and so intensively as against Russia right now. Accordingly, the system of monitoring and control over the implementation of sanctions wasn't adopted to such an intensive use of them. This is all being rebuilt very quickly, but not so easy on wartime. And this process continues, and I think that everything will be fine, and the trend of circumventing sanctions will not continue for a long time.
This ultimately impacts Russia's ability to manufacture, sustain and deliver advanced weapons and technology to the battlefield in Ukraine. Thank you, dear world. Therefore, while the quality of the military equipment used by the Ukrainian army continues to improve, thank you, dear world, again, the quality of Russia's weapons continues to degrade. Of course, the Kremlin still possesses a significant degree of adaptability to Western sanctions, taking advantage of its pre-war stockpiles of old equipment, as well as countries willing to supply Moscow with restricted dual-use items and technology via a web of illicit supply chains. Considering Russia's existing capabilities and limitations, it will likely opt for a slow-paced attritional campaign in Ukraine, putting pressure on Kyiv and its Western partners, but thereby further stressing its military and industrial base, already stretched thin by sanctions and the last 12 months of the invasion. So what's to expect? Talking figures, according to Russia's official preliminary estimate, federal budget revenues in January 2023 amounted 35% less than compared to the same indicator in January 2022. In the first months of the year, oil and gas revenues in the budget showed 46% decrease in revenues from this source when compared to last year, primarily due to the decline in quotations for Urals oil and a reduction in natural gas exports. Talking in easy terms, Russian economy and war economy is sinking. According to preliminary estimates, federal budget expenditures in January 2023 exceeded those of the same period last year by 59%. Apparently, within just 1 month, the budget deficit exceeded 60% of the predicted indicator for the year. Let's not forget that there are still 8 months of the year ahead, and the expenses are spiraling. Russia has planned defense expenditures for 2023 of 4,981 billion rubles, which is $66.1 billion, which is 303 billion rubles more than in 2022. And of course, it will be spent on its criminal war in Ukraine. While the changing nature of the war and the international supply of the defensive and as well as offensive weapons to Ukraine suggest the conflict will be increasingly expensive for both sides. However, while these expenses for Ukraine are intended to be covered by financial assistance and military support from West and international financial institutions, Russia will have to cover the costs from its internal resource and reserves. Since the G7 and its allies have approved a cap on the price of Russian oil, these extra expenses will have to be met against the background of a decrease in oil and gas revenues. This possesses new risks for the country's finance and the ruble. Given the low business activity in Russia, there is likely to be little option for the government than to spend foreign exchange reserves and the assets of the National Welfare Fund. Breaking these hard things into easy terms, all of this suggests that the coming month and years maybe will prove substantially more and more challenging for Russia. Well, glory to Ukraine. It was Henry Kino on UATV State Channel, bringing the hard truth in easy terms for the whole free world directly from Ukraine. Stay safe and tuned for more tomorrow.